We have huge rates of infidelity. Divorce is up enormously. Is this not a more sort of modern approach to relationships?
It's not actually a modern approach to relationships, and it's interesting because I grew up in a very sort of free love era. My parents had an open relationship, and to be honest, that's been part of my journey, and it's partly why I do this job, because it took me a long time to kind of dismantle and unravel all the consequences of that, actually.
Go on, what are the consequences then? Because they're thinking of having babies.
So I think that's a disastrous idea. I think that, you know, their idea of what love is very confused. I think that this whole sort of idea about poly relationships is about kind of having your cake and eating it as such.
What impact did it have on you,
But there's not really much
though?
point in having a cake if you're not going to eat it. You just look at it and go,
well, OK, but my point about that is that I think our whole society has kind of become very much about greed, about having what you want when you want it, about a quick fix, as opposed to actually the bigger picture and being in a more mature kind of state. And so I think that poly relationships often, I do think that there's often some sort of coercion as well going on, or some kind of subtle emotional abuse where one person has all the power.
You come from this from a very knowledgeable point of view in terms of you saw it happening around you in some way or another.
And it made me feel very confused about boundaries, about how relationships work. And I think the main thing, though, that my main point, and this comes from my own experience, and also working with women, with clients, and I do have a past client, actually, who was involved in a poly situation, and she had a very similar experience to me, which is that ultimately it dilutes intimacy, and it's a way of avoiding commitment, and it's having a kind of a backup plan so that you don't have to fully invest yourself emotionally in relationships. And this is the main thing that I help women with, to understand that once they build on their self-esteem and their confidence, that they can have their ideal sort of amazing relationship with one person.
So
go on.
It's interesting. I've had completely the opposite journey to you. Your journey is really fascinating, but mine is yours in reverse, in that I was brought up with narratives that I should be heterosexual, that I should be monogamous, and I've had to dismantle all of those narratives and the damaging effects that they had. I was a serial monogamist. I was breaking up every few years. I mistook love for that very early stage of romantic love, because that's what we see in the films, and I was struggling when I was in a more companionate phase with partners, and many of my friends were breaking up or were having affairs.
But is that throuple the answer? Maybe you haven't met the right person.
It is the answer for some people, and I've actually learned how to do monogamy from my friends who are polyamorous, who had just so much compassion, honesty, trust, respect, communication, wonderful old-fashioned values in their relationships, not modern values at all. Actually, monogamy is a very modern construct. If you go back far enough in history, you see tons and tons of polyamorous communities in hunter-gatherer days.
But
and
polyamorous
actually,
in the sense
there was no sexism.
Going back to what was just said there, it's a question of who holds the power in that, who's calling the shots,
and
in
I
a sense.
Often women. From what you've just said, though, is that doesn't quite make sense to me, because you've said you've taken all the stuff from a poly relationship and put that into a monogamous relationship. So you're not in a poly relationship, but you're advocating poly relationships. So that
I'm definitely advocating.
What I would say about that is that for you, perhaps, that the reason your monogamous relationships didn't work out, which is the same for most people, and why we have such a high divorce rate, is that most people don't have the self-esteem, the confidence, and the skills, the relationship skills to make a monogamous relationship work.
Well, interesting.
I mean, to give us everything.
But interesting, both Lindsay and Brittany there, who are the women who are willing to get pregnant with Terry, and there's a relationship between the women as well. It's not just Terry with the two girls. Both seem to be very confident and very comfortable in the situation that they have created. So there doesn't feel to be sort of any, doesn't feel like there's any pressure being exerted on, or anyone feels like they're left out. So if there is a situation like that where there is a throuple, three people that are very comfortable and competent, then clearly there are people that it does suit. Okay.
Definitely.
But I don't believe that that's true. I believe that they've perhaps been slightly brainwashed, that there's a codependent kind of connection going on there with the guy. And I think that often it is the man who holds the power,
it's very
there are
important
two
to say
women who get manipulated.
in most situations, it's often the woman who opens up the relationship, because monogamy is a patriarchal construct which benefits men. Actually, women thrive in open relationships. Female sexuality is way more vast and profound than we dare to admit.
Well, do you think we're going to start seeing more of them? Because I don't know anybody who's in a throuple.
Or polyamorous, yeah.
Well, I think we don't talk about it. I found out I knew hundreds of people, but they just
you don't know hundreds.
Well, I've met hundreds now because of I've been through my job and been talking about the book, and I've met many people. But it was amazing how many people I assumed to be monogamous came out of the woodwork.
It's interesting,
and were interviewed by them.
Lots of people getting in touch. Bridget says, I couldn't bear my partner to have a relationship with someone else. It's a horrible thought. It would break me. Yeah. Debbie says, I totally disagree with this. If your partner can't give you everything you need, then you need to find somebody who can. Whereas Caitlin says, I honestly think that if you're passionate about each other, you all have the same family values, so this could be a very successful family life indeed. So,
yeah, we've had thousands of people voting on Twitter as well. We asked if it was possible to be in a loving relationship with more than one person.
Yeah, 75% you said no.
Yeah.
They're with you. 4,000 people have voted.
But how do you define love? I mean, we all love lots of friends and lots of family members.
Yeah, but you don't want to invite them into your intimate relationship.
Well, exactly. It's the lack of boundaries, and I don't agree with you at all that it's usually the woman who opens it up. And maybe if she does that, I think it's for the wrong reasons.
Well, it did in that situation. It certainly did in that relationship.
Yes, exactly.
It was Brittany and Lindsay that did it.
I wonder.
Monogamy on the Mahogany. That's the next book. Thank you very much for coming in, for talking about this.
Other wooded surfaces are available, just to be fair.
We should stop talking about wood with this situation.